I walked into David Sterling's office expecting to discuss our quarterly projections. Instead, I found Christine from HR sitting in the corner with her laptop open, and her expression carefully neutral. My stomach dropped. David didn't even stand up. He just gestured to the chair across from his desk. "Roseline, sit down." I sat, my mind racing through everything I might have done wrong. "We're terminating your employment effective immediately," David said, his voice flat and corporate. This decision came from pressure from major shareholders. Specifically, Arthur Vance has expressed concerns about your disruptive innovation strategy. He feels it's become a liability to the company's stability. I stared at him in disbelief. Arthur Vance? I've never even met him. That's irrelevant. The board believes this is the right direction for quantum dynamics. Security appeared in the doorway before I could respond. They escorted me back to my desk while my team watched in shocked silence. I packed my things into a cardboard box, feeling their eyes on me. For years of work, of late nights and successful projects, ending in 15 minutes. I spent that night in a fog, alternating between rage and despair. By morning, I'd started making plans. I needed to update my resume, reach out to my network, figure out my next move. Then my phone rang. Unknown number. "Roseline Chun?" The voice was smooth, confident. "This is Arthur Vance." I sat up straight. "Mr. Vance. I understand David Sterling terminated your employment yesterday. On my recommendation, supposedly." "That's what he said." Arthur laughed, a sound without much humor. "David is a coward and a fool. Your firing was a test of leadership that he failed spectacularly. A competent CEO would have defended his best VP of innovation, not thrown her away to appease a shareholder." I didn't know what to say. "I've been watching your work at Quantum for 2 years, Arthur continued. "I need someone with your vision at Vance Capital. I'm offering you a board seat." My head spun. Yesterday I'd been fired. Today I was offered a position on one of the most powerful investment funds in tech. The interview at Vance Capital's headquarters was unlike anything I'd experienced. The building was all glass and steel, overlooking the city from 40 stories up. Arthur met me personally in a conference room that probably costs more than my annual salary to furnish. "Tell me about Quantum's financial processes," he said after the initial pleasantries. I described what I knew about our budget cycles, approval chains, vendor management. Arthur nodded along, but then he started asking questions that were too specific. Details about accounts payable workflows. Names of specific overseas vendors. Information that even I, as VP of Innovation, shouldn't have known that well. "How do you know all this?" I asked carefully. Arthur smiled. "I make it my business to understand companies I invest in. Due diligence." But it was more than that. He had information that suggested sources deep inside Quantum. People feeding him internal data that went far beyond what any shareholder should access. I filed that observation away for later. I spent the weekend going through my personal files from Quantum. Before they'd cut off my access, I'd backed up years of project documents and financial reports to my home computer. It was standard practice, nothing illegal. As I reviewed the data, looking for anything that might explain my sudden firing, I noticed something odd. There were irregular financial transactions in several projects that David had taken direct control of 6 months ago. Payments to vendors I didn't recognize. Purchase orders that didn't match the project scopes. The pattern was subtle, but it was there. Money moving through vendor accounts in ways that didn't quite make sense. Large payments for services that seemed overpriced or unnecessary. I pulled up the vendor names and started researching them online. Most had minimal web presence. No real office locations. Generic business descriptions. They looked like shell companies. Was David embezzling? Was that why Arthur wanted me on his board? My phone buzzed with a message from a number I didn't recognize. "Need to talk. Urgent. Coffee shop on Market Street. Tomorrow 9 a.m. Come alone. TB, I almost deleted it. Then I realized. TB. Thomas Brigham. He'd been a junior analyst at Quantum, working in the financial audit department. I met him at the coffee shop. Thomas looked nervous, constantly glancing around like he expected someone to be watching. I shouldn't be here, he said. But I had to warn you. David's been firing everyone who worked on financial audits. Anyone who might have seen something. You need to stop digging into whatever you're digging into. How do you know I'm investigating anything? Because I know you, Roseline. And because David's been asking questions about what you might have taken when you left. He's paranoid. Thomas leaned forward. There's something wrong with the books. I saw it before they transferred me out of auditing. But I couldn't prove anything before David pushed me out. Just stop. For your own safety. I accepted Arthur's board position at Vance Capital. The offer was too good to refuse, and I needed the platform it would give me. My first board meeting was an education in power dynamics. 8 of us sat around a massive conference table. Arthur at the head, radiating controlled authority. He outlined his next big move. We're planning a friendly acquisition of quantum dynamics. The company is undervalued and underperforming. With proper management, we can triple its value in 2 years. He looked at me. Roseline, you know the company better than anyone. I'm counting on your insights to make this acquisition successful. The other board members nodded approvingly. But I noticed something. As Arthur described his vision for quantum, he carefully avoided mentioning the financial irregularities I'd spotted. He talked about market position, product pipeline, team capabilities. Never about the suspicious vendor payments. He knew. He had to know. So why wasn't he mentioning it? I needed more information about what David had been doing. I reached out to Victor Hartley, Quantum's former CFO. Victor had resigned 6 months ago, right around the time David had taken direct control of those suspicious projects. We met at a bar in a different part of the city. Victor looked older than I remembered, worn down by something. David forced me out, he said after his second drink. I found evidence he was creating slush funds through overseas vendors. Fake invoices, inflated prices, kickbacks. Classic embezzlement. How much are we talking about? I couldn't get exact figures before he pushed me out. But millions. Maybe tens of millions. Victor leaned closer. He had help. Someone on the board was protecting him. Every time I tried to escalate my concerns, they got buried. That's why I resigned. I couldn't fight both David and the board. Did you tell anyone else? I tried. But without proof, I just looked like a disgruntled executive. I moved on. You should too, Roseline. Arthur called me into his office the next week. I'm putting you in charge of due diligence for the quantum acquisition. You know the company inside and out. I need you to find every skeleton in their closet. He smiled. Nothing can be hidden. Every problem needs to be exposed so we can fix it when we take over. It was a perfect cover. Arthur was giving me explicit permission to investigate the very financial irregularities I'd already spotted. But why? If he already knew about David's embezzlement, why did he need me to find it? Unless he wanted someone else to discover it. Someone who could present it without implicating him. I was being positioned as the whistleblower. Arthur would stay clean while I exposed David's crimes. And in the process, quantum stock would crater, making the acquisition cheaper. I was being used. Again. But this time I saw it coming. I hired a private investigator. Not through Vance Capital's resources, but independently. Patricia Wu specialized in corporate financial fraud, and she was expensive. But I needed someone who worked for me alone. Follow the money from these vendor accounts, I told her, providing the suspicious transaction data from Quantum. I need to know where it's really going. Patricia worked fast. Within a week, she had preliminary findings. The vendor payments weren't going to legitimate businesses. They were flowing through a network of shell companies registered in the Cayman Islands. From there, the trail got murky, but Patricia was confident she could trace it further with more time. This is serious fraud, she said. We're talking major embezzlement. Whoever set this up knew what they were doing. Can you prove where the money ultimately ends up? Give me another week. I gave her 2. I wanted the complete picture before I made my move. I was working late in my home office when I heard the glass break. Downstairs in my living room. My heart pounding. I grabbed my phone and crept to the top of the stairs. I could hear someone moving around below, opening drawers, searching. I called 911 in a whisper. The operator told me to stay quiet and stay hidden. The police arrived in 8 minutes, but by then the intruder was gone. They'd broken in through a back window. Nothing valuable was taken. Not my laptop, not my jewelry, not my TV. Just my backup hard drives. The external drives where I'd stored all my quantum financial analysis. The police said it was probably a targeted burglary. Someone who knew what you had and wanted it specifically. I knew exactly who. David knew I was investigating. And he was getting desperate. My phone rang at midnight. David's number. I almost didn't answer. You need to back off, Roseline. His voice was tight with stress. I know you're working with Arthur on the acquisition. I know you're digging into our finances. Is there something to find, David? Don't play games. I have information about you. Personal things from your HR file. Things that would be embarrassing if they became public. I felt cold anger wash over me. Are you blackmailing me? I'm giving you a chance. Convince Arthur to drop the acquisition. Tell him quantum isn't worth the investment. Do that and we both walk away clean. And if I don't, then we both lose. But you'll lose more. He hung up. I sat in the dark, thinking. David was desperate enough to threaten me, which meant he knew the walls were closing in. Patricia had been right. This was bigger than I'd thought. I spent the next day researching Vance Capital's ownership structure. Something had been bothering me about Arthur's operation. The fund was too successful, too ethical in its public reputation, for someone willing to manipulate a company into collapse for profit. That's when I found her. Ingrid Rostova. A tech billionaire who'd made her fortune in cybersecurity. She owned 40% of Vance Capital, but never appeared in public statements about the fund. She was Arthur's silent partner. I researched Ingrid extensively. She was known for ethical investing. Her other ventures focused on sustainable technology and worker protections. She'd even written op-eds criticizing predatory acquisition tactics. How much did Ingrid know about Arthur's plans for quantum? Did she understand that he was letting the company collapse to get a better acquisition price? If Ingrid found out Arthur was violating her ethical standards, what would she do? I filed this information away. I was starting to see a path forward. Patricia called with her final report. The full scope of David's embezzlement was staggering. $45 million over 3 years. The money had flowed through fake vendors, been laundered through offshore accounts, and ultimately ended up in David's personal control. But here was the critical detail. The scheme was about to collapse. Several of the fake vendors were demanding real payments now. David had created a house of cards, and it was starting to fall. He's got maybe 2 months before this blows up publicly, Patricia said. The audit trails are too obvious. Once the real vendors start complaining about non-payment, someone will look closer at where the money actually went. I thanked Patricia and paid her final invoice. Then I called Arthur. I've found something in the quantum due diligence. Something big. We need to meet. Arthur's voice was carefully neutral. How big? $45 million big. David called me again. This time his tone was different. Not threatening, but desperate. Roseline, I need your help. I'll give you anything you want. Just help me fix this before it's too late. Fix what, David? You know what? The vendor payments. The offshore accounts. I made mistakes, but I can fix them if I have time. He took a shaky breath. Arthur's acquisition is going to expose everything. The due diligence will find it all. But if you can convince him to back off, I can cover the shortfall. I can make the books right. How exactly would you do that? I have assets. I can move money back into the company. Make it look like the vendor payments were legitimate all along. But I need time. I need the pressure to stop. He paused. I'll support you as CEO. I'll resign and recommend you to the board. You can have my job, Roseline. Just help me survive this. I pretended to consider it. Let me think about it. I made the hardest decision of my career. I leaked part of the embezzlement evidence to financial journalists. Not everything. Just enough to start asking questions. A reporter from the Wall Street Journal called Quantum's CFO, asking about irregular vendor payments. Another from Bloomberg inquired about offshore accounts. The market reacted immediately. Quantum stock began falling. 5% the first day, 10% the next. Investors were spooked. Something was wrong at Quantum Dynamics, and nobody knew how deep the problems went. Arthur called me delighted. Perfect timing. The stock is falling exactly as projected. We'll be able to acquire them at 70% of their previous valuation. I made non-committal sounds of agreement. But inside, I was calculating my next move. I'd started the dominoes falling. Now I needed to control where they landed. Quantum's board called an emergency shareholder meeting. The stock had dropped 25% in a week. Major institutional investors were demanding answers. David tried to control the narrative. These allegations are being spread by disgruntled former employees, he told the board. Specifically Roseline Chun, who was terminated for poor performance, and is now working with a competitor to damage our reputation. Several board members nodded along. David had support. But other shareholders weren't convinced. We need a full financial audit, one demanded. Independent investigators. Complete transparency. The board agreed to order an audit. David's face went pale. He was out of time. And he knew it. After the meeting, I received angry messages from former colleagues. They believed David's story that I was behind the leak. That I was seeking revenge for being fired. I didn't respond. Let them believe what they wanted. The truth would come out soon enough. I needed to meet with Ingrid Rostova. But she was notoriously private, never granting interviews or taking meetings with people outside her inner circle. So I went through her lawyers. I sent a detailed email to her legal team. I'm a board member at Vance Capital with evidence that Arthur Vance has been withholding material information about an acquisition target. This violates his fiduciary duty to his partners and contradicts Vance Capital's stated ethical standards. 2 days later, I received a response. Not from lawyers, but from Ingrid's chief of staff. Ms. Rostova is interested in your concerns. Conference call scheduled for Friday at 2 p.m. The call was just me and Ingrid. Her voice was calm, analytical. Tell me what Arthur has been hiding. I laid it out. The embezzlement at Quantum. Arthur's knowledge of it months before the acquisition talks began. His deliberate decision to let the situation worsen, so the stock price would fall. He's letting a company collapse so he can buy it cheaper, I said. That's not ethical investing. That's predatory opportunism. Arthur called me into his office the next week. His demeanor had changed. The friendly mentor act was gone. Now he was all business. The Quantum acquisition is moving forward faster than planned. The audit will expose David's fraud, and will be positioned to acquire them at an exceptional price. He pulled up a presentation on his screen. Here's the restructuring plan. We'll lay off 70% of the workforce. Keep only the essential IP and the engineers who created it. Then we'll sell the patents to our network of tech companies for 3 times what we paid. I stared at the numbers. Hundreds of jobs eliminated. A company dismantled. You want me to lead this? You know the company. You know the people. You'll make the cuts efficiently and professionally. Arthur smiled. And you'll be well compensated. 7-figure bonus once the restructuring is complete. This was his real plan. Not saving Quantum. Destroying it for profit. I reached out to Thomas Brigham, the junior analyst who'd warned me weeks ago. You said you saw evidence of David's embezzlement. Do you still have documents? I kept copies. Against company policy, but I kept them. Would you be willing to come forward as a whistleblower? With legal protection? Thomas was quiet for a long time. They'll destroy me. They'll destroy you anyway if you stay silent. David's house of cards is falling. Everyone connected to the fraud is going to get investigated. Better to be the one who cooperates than the one who looks complicit. It took me 3 more conversations to convince him. But finally Thomas agreed. With Patricia's help, we connected him with the SEC. He provided his documents and testimony. 2 days later, the SEC announced a formal investigation into Quantum Dynamics. David's embezzlement was going public. I met with Ingrid's lawyers in person. They'd been reviewing the evidence I'd provided about Arthur's conduct. Ms. Rostova is concerned, the lead attorney said. Arthur's actions appear to violate several clauses of their partnership agreement. Which clauses specifically? The requirement to disclose material information about potential acquisitions, the ethical investing guidelines they agreed to, the fiduciary duty to protect the fund's reputation. She slid a document across the table. This gives Ms. Rostova grounds to remove Arthur from fund management. But she wants to be certain before taking such a drastic step. What would constitute certainty? Direct evidence that Arthur knew about Quantum's financial fraud before initiating acquisition talks. Documentation showing he deliberately withheld this from Ms. Rostova and the other limited partners. I smiled. I can get you that evidence. Patricia had been thorough. Her investigation had uncovered emails between Arthur and his sources inside Quantum. Emails from months ago discussing David's embezzlement. Proof that Arthur had known everything from the beginning. The shareholder meeting at Quantum was chaos. Hundreds of investors packed into the convention center, demanding answers. David stood at the podium, trying to maintain control. The allegations against me are false. I have been a faithful steward of this company for 8 years. Arthur sat in the front row with his team from Vance Capital. He looked calm, confident, ready to swoop in as the white knight investor once David fell. Then I walked in. I wasn't a shareholder anymore. I wasn't an employee. But I had information that both David and Arthur desperately wanted to keep hidden. I have a statement to make, I said loudly enough to be heard. The room went silent. David looked at me with pure hatred. Arthur's expression was harder to read. Surprised maybe. And concerned. This acquisition is based on manipulation and fraud, I began. And I can prove it. I prepared my presentation carefully. First, I showed evidence of David's embezzlement. The fake vendors. The offshore accounts. The $45 million that had been stolen from Quantum over 3 years. The shareholders erupted in anger. David tried to deny it, but the evidence was overwhelming. Then I played my second card. Arthur Vance knew about this fraud months ago, I said. He had sources inside Quantum feeding him information. He knew David was embezzling and he did nothing. I displayed the emails Patricia had uncovered. Messages showing Arthur's knowledge of the fraud. Discussions about how the scandal would affect Quantum's stock price. Plans to wait for the price to fall before initiating the acquisition. Finally, I played audio recordings. Conversations between Arthur and me where he'd outlined his plan to dismantle Quantum. To lay off 70% of the workforce and sell the IP for profit. The room was in complete chaos now. Both David and Arthur tried to speak, but nobody was listening. Security had to restore order. The aftermath moved quickly. Ingrid Rostova's lawyers filed papers removing Arthur from Vance Capital's management within 24 hours. They cited his violation of the partnership agreement and breach of fiduciary duty. Ingrid herself released a statement. I invested in Vance Capital because I believed it represented ethical, sustainable investment practices. Arthur Vance's actions violated everything we stood for. He is no longer involved with the fund in any capacity. At a press conference, Ingrid personally endorsed my plan for Quantum. Not Arthur's plan to dismantle the company, but my alternative. Quantum Dynamics needs restructuring, not destruction. Roseline Chen has presented a thoughtful plan to preserve jobs while addressing the financial fraud. Vance Capital will support this approach. With Ingrid's backing, everything changed. The media narrative shifted from predatory acquisition to ethical rescue. I wasn't the vengeful ex-employee anymore. I was the whistleblower who'd exposed corruption. David was arrested at his home. Federal charges for embezzlement, wire fraud, and money laundering. The news footage showed him being led away in handcuffs. Quantum's board met in emergency session. They needed new leadership immediately. Someone who understood the company, who had credibility with investors, and who could navigate the crisis. They called me. We'd like to offer you the position of interim CEO, the board chairman said. We know this is unusual given how your employment ended, but you're the person we need right now. I accepted. Not because I wanted revenge, but because I wanted to save the company. Ingrid's fund, now restructured without Arthur, became our white knight investor. They provided capital to stabilize operations while we cleaned up David's mess. We laid off people. That was unavoidable. But we saved most of the jobs. We preserved the innovation that had made quantum valuable in the first place. 1 year later, I sat in my office. Not just any office. The CEO's office that David had occupied when he fired me. Quantum was profitable again. We'd restructured carefully, cut the fraud, and refocused on what we did best. The stock price had recovered to 70% of its pre-scandal value, and was climbing. I'd established a new governance structure with Ingrid's help. Independent board oversight. Mandatory financial audits. Whistleblower protections. Every safeguard we could think of to prevent another David Sterling. Ingrid visited quarterly, always professional but warm. "You saved this company," she said during her last visit. "Arthur would have stripped it for parts. David would have run it into the ground. You found the third path." I thought about the journey. From being sacrificed to appease a shareholder to controlling the company's destiny. From being David's scapegoat to being his replacement. I'd outmaneuvered a corrupt CEO and a predatory investor. Not through luck, but through careful planning, strategic thinking, and refusing to be anyone's pawn. The woman they'd thrown away had become the person who saved them all.